most people are afraid to release what they carry. They confuse possession with identity and believe that letting go of what they've accumulated means disappearing along with the baggage. To escape this fear, they do the opposite. They accumulate even more. What these people don't realize is that they're building a life so filled up on the outside that the person on the inside no longer fits within it. In the philosophical tradition that reaches all the way to Michel de Montaigne, this invisible accumulation has a precise name: voluntary servitude. The most subtle form of human imprisonment, because it's the only one in which the prisoner holds the key and refuses to use it. As long as this servitude isn't undone, the person remains a diminished version of themselves, exhausted from carrying what they could have released years ago. Imagine someone who has spent 3 decades piling up titles and responsibilities, only to discover, somewhere near 60, that they never really knew the person who existed underneath all of it. The modern man has become a professional collector without even noticing. He collects objects the algorithm chose for him, opinions the feed pushed onto him, ambitions his parents murmured in silence throughout his childhood, consumption patterns his salary has to sustain until the end of every month. He wakes up already in debt, owing money to the bank, attention to the boss, performance to the family, presence to the distant friend, validation to the very image he built on social media. The blue light of the phone touches his face before the brightness of the window even reaches him. In that first contact with the screen, the day already begins in the red. There isn't even a single minute of pause between waking up and shouldering the weight. At night, when he finally lies down, there's a strange emptiness. He has everything they told him he needed to have. He has the job he chased, the relationship he asked for, the house he financed in installments, the body he trained during whatever time was left over. And even so, something is missing that he can't quite name. He's the one missing. The question nobody asks is simple and brutal. What if everything you're carrying isn't your life, but the very thing that's keeping you from having one? What if the full house, the full calendar, the full head, the heart full of other people's promises are exactly what's suffocating you? Excess has become the standard anesthetic of contemporary civilization. Consumption has become an emotional prosthetic, promising to fill a void that it itself deepens with every installment purchase. And in the middle of the modern clutter, the person loses what matters most. They lose the inner silence where you hear who you are. There's a man, dead now for more than 400 years, who may have been the first great philosopher of letting go in a modern key. He didn't write a self-help manual. He didn't preach renunciation. He didn't condemn pleasure. He simply observed, with brutal sincerity, what remains when you release the unnecessary. And what remains, he discovered, is precisely what we've spent our entire lives trying to buy. This man's name is Michel de Montaigne. He was born on February 28, 1533, in the family castle in the Périgord region of southwestern France. He was the son of a wealthy minor noble, educated in Latin before he even learned French. His father, Pierre Aykem, obsessed with Renaissance humanism, hired a German tutor who spoke only classical Latin with the boy, so that by the age of 6, he could read Virgil better than the teachers at the school in Bordeaux. He studied law, became a magistrate in that city, married Françoise de la Chassagne, had 6 daughters of whom only one survived childhood, and inherited the title of Lord of Montaigne and the family castle upon his father's death in 1568. From the outside, he was a conventional 16th century success. On the inside, he felt the same thing that many grown men feel today. That he was living a life he hadn't chosen, performing roles that didn't fulfill him, repeating gestures that had stopped meaning anything a long time ago. In 1571, at the age of 38, he did what few have the courage to do. He left the magistracy behind. He climbed up to the round library on the 3rd floor of the tower of his castle, with around 1,000 bound volumes, and had 54 phrases in Latin and Greek painted on the ceiling beams, quotations from Socrates, Seneca, Lucretius, Plutarch, Ecclesiastes. He didn't do it to isolate himself from the world. He did it to finally listen to himself. And he began writing a kind of text that no one had ever written before. It wasn't a treatise, it wasn't a religious confession, it wasn't poetry. It was what he called an essay, from the French verb essayer, to try, attempts, drafts, trials of thought about himself. The result was a work in 3 books, the Essays, first published in 1580 and expanded until the author's death in 1592. Sarah Bakewell, the British biographer who wrote the book How to Live, or A Life of Montaigne, in 1 question and 20 attempts at an answer, released in 2010 by Other Press, observes that these essays created an entire literary genre and may well have been the first honest psychological self-portrait of Western modernity. Stefan Zweig, in his unfinished biography Montaigne, written in 1942 during the final months before his suicide in Petropolis, said that Montaigne was the man who taught Europe how to be free on the inside, even when everything on the outside was in ruins. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, 3 centuries later, wrote in a passage of Untimely Meditations, published in 1874, that the fact that Montaigne had written is reason enough that it's worth living on earth. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American essayist, devoted an entire chapter to Montaigne in his book Representative Men, published in 1850, calling him the philosopher of human common sense, and saying that opening the essays was like listening to the voice of your own mirror talking back to you. Virginia Woolf, in a critical essay published in the Times Literary Supplement in January 1924, observed that Montaigne was perhaps the first writer to discover that listening to oneself was the work of an entire lifetime, and that no one before him had had the courage to treat his own mind as an object worthy of patient study. This is the man who has something to say about what you're carrying today, here in the 21st century, with the phone buzzing in your pocket while you try to fall asleep and the work feed pinging notifications at 11 at night. Later on in this video, I'm going to show you the single question that Montaigne had cast in metal and which sums up everything he learned in 20 years inside the tower. Hold on to that image. Before climbing up to that tower, Montaigne lived through something that changed everything. In his early 20s, he met a colleague at the Parliament of Bordeaux named Etienne de la Boétie. It wasn't an ordinary friendship. It was what he would later describe in the essay Of Friendship, the 28th essay in the first book of the Essays, as a union of souls so complete that he couldn't rationally explain why they had loved each other so deeply. The phrase became famous. When asked why he loved that man, Montaigne wrote one of the most quoted sentences in the history of French literature. Because it was him, because it was me. There was no justification. There was pure recognition. La Boétie was also a philosopher, the author of a small political treatise called Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, written while he was still young, in which he asked why men obey tyrants when all they would have to do is stop obeying for any tyranny to come crashing down. He was brilliant. He was fragile. In 1563, at just 32 years old, La Boétie fell ill, probably with bubonic plague or dysentery, and died within 3 days, with Montaigne at his bedside, holding his hand. The letters Montaigne wrote to his father describing those 3 days are among the most moving documents in European literature from that century. That death shattered Montaigne. He was 30 years old. For the first time, he understood in his flesh, and not in books, that nothing of what we love most belongs to us. That the person for whom you would open your veins might be dead before the end of the week. That the most sacred bond gives you no metaphysical guarantee whatsoever. And it was precisely this pain, refined in the years that followed into thought, that planted in Montaigne the first seed of letting go. It wasn't coldness. It was the exact opposite of coldness. It was the deep understanding that precisely because everything passes, you have to love without deluding yourself, to carry the loved one as a gift received and not as a possession acquired. There's something absurdly modern about this pain. Today, when someone dies or simply pulls away or ends the relationship, most people react as if they had been robbed, as if the bond were property registered at a courthouse. Montaigne learned, in the worst way possible, that the bond is only temporary permission, and whoever understands this, paradoxically, loves better, loves in the present, loves without bargaining, loves without that underground control that almost every modern love carries baked into its subtext. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung, in his book Memories, Dreams, Reflections, published in 1962, observed that emotional maturity only begins when a person accepts that no one belongs to anyone. Before that, what looks like love is often possession disguised as affection. The French psychoanalyst Marie de Hennezel, in the book L'amour intime, released in 1995, describes her work with terminal patients and shows how those who accepted impermanence lived their final months better than those who were still fighting against it. Montaigne, without these modern psychological categories, had understood the same thing by looking at his own grief. There's a Stoic thought from Epictetus, recorded in the Manual or Enchiridion, written by his disciple Arrian in the 2nd century, that says roughly this: "Never say about anything that I have lost it, but that I have given it back. The son has died. He's been given back. The wife has died. She's been given back. You say they robbed you of your property. No, it was given back. But the one who took it was bad. It doesn't matter through whom the lender demands the thing back. While he grants it to you, take care of it as something that belongs to another." This text, which Montaigne knew well, runs through his entire reflection on bonds and loss. Understanding philosophy is interesting. Practicing philosophy can change your life. Start with the link I left in the pinned comment. After his father's death in 1568, Montaigne definitively inherited the castle. 3 years later, he resigned from his magistrate position and withdrew to that tower. To understand the magnitude of this gesture, you have to understand the historical context. The 16th century in France was one of the bloodiest in European history. The wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants left more than 2 million dead. The massacre of St. Bartholomew's Night in August 1572, in which thousands of Huguenots were murdered in Paris and other French cities, took place just 1 year after Montaigne's retreat. The plague kept coming back. Politics was assassination. Religion was civil war. The economy was legitimized plunder. In this chaos, Montaigne chose to climb up to the tower, close the library door, and think. It wasn't alienation. It was spiritual survival. He continued to fulfill public duties at specific moments. He served as mayor of Bordeaux between 1581 and 1585, in the middle of a plague epidemic that killed a portion of the city's population. He negotiated peace between religious factions. He received King Henry of Navarre, the future Henry IV, in his castle on 2 occasions. But he always went back to that tower, and this image needs to sink deep into your head. A man with money, status, family, connections, who chooses to build a place where none of those things can enter without being invited. This is the founding gesture of mature letting go. It's not abandoning the world. It's no longer being its property. It's not becoming a hermit. It's no longer being a hostage. You don't need a stone tower in Périgord, but you do need, somewhere in your day, a space the algorithm can't reach, where the boss doesn't write, where the kid doesn't call, where the feed doesn't scroll. 20 minutes is enough, but it has to exist. Without that space, you're being rented out the entire time by the external world, and whoever lives as a tenant inside themselves never truly rests. Later on in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how Montaigne described the inner place that every person needs to build, using an image from 16th century commerce that seems tailor-made for the life you're living right now. At some point in his maturity, Montaigne had a personal medal struck. On one side, a scale in perfect balance. On the other, 3 words in Old French engraved in metal. Que sais-je? What do I know? It was the concentrated summary of his entire work. Pierre Hadot, the 20th century French philosopher who wrote the book Philosophy as a Way of Life, published by Blackwell in 1995, showed that this question is the heart of ancient wisdom. There is no wisdom without the radical letting go of certainties, and there is no freedom without accepting your own not knowing. Modern man is addicted to certainty. He holds firm opinions about international politics, the global economy, nutrition, other people's relationships, on topics he has read 3.5 posts about on some social network. He defends those opinions as if they were his identity. When someone disagrees, he feels as if he's been personally attacked. Why? Because he confused position with person. He confused provisional opinion with permanent essence. He forgets that an opinion is nothing more than a bet that can be revised, a bet that can be wrong, a bet that costs very little to change if better information comes along. Montaigne proposes the opposite, suspending judgment. The ancient skeptics, especially Sextus Empiricus, the author of the Pyrrhonian Hypotyposes, taught a method called epoche, suspension. It's not saying that everything is false, it's saying that you don't yet know enough to close the case, and that living well is possible even without closing every answer. Montaigne read Sextus Empiricus avidly, and the influence shows up throughout the second book of the Essays, especially in the gigantic essay Apology for Raymond Sebond in Book the Sioux, number 12, the longest essay in the entire work and perhaps the most philosophically dense. Letting go of the obligation to have an opinion on everything is one of the most liberating forms of letting go in adult life. You don't have to vote on every controversy of the day. You don't have to defend your choice of clothes, of career, of city, of diet. You don't have to win every argument at the dinner table. Maturity arrives the moment you can say, "I don't know," and feel relief instead of shame. When you let go of certainty, you listen. When you listen, you learn. When you learn, you change. And whoever changes is finally alive. The rest is a walking mausoleum of frozen convictions. In the essay of Solitude, in the first book, number 39, Montaigne delivers what may be the most beautiful and practical image in his entire body of work. He wrote, in 16th century French, that every man needs an arrière-boutique entirely his own. The word arrière-boutique referred, in the commerce of that era, to the back room behind the shop. The merchant would serve customers at the counter, talk, sell, negotiate, weigh, wrap. But the back room was his alone. It was where he kept what was truly his, where he rested, ate, slept, thought, away from any clientele. Montaigne translates this into the soul. Every person needs an inner back room, a space inside yourself where no external event enters without formal permission. It can rain out there, the stock market can crash, the relationship can end, the body can fall ill. In there, in that inner room, none of that gets in unless you deliberately decide to open the door. That is the inviolable center of human freedom. And whoever doesn't build that room lives without a roof, exposed to whatever storm the news cycle invents. It's important to understand what this is not. It's not alienation from reality. It's not denial of problems. It's not emotional coldness. It's exactly the opposite. Precisely because you have an inner center, you can move through the world without being destroyed by it. Seneca, in Letter 92 to Lucilius, part of the Letters to Lucilius that Montaigne read in the French translation of his time, said something similar. The wise man is the one who can lose everything and still not lose himself. Montaigne, a compulsive reader of Seneca, translates this Stoic idea into a more domestic, more visual, more accessible image for someone who wasn't born a professional philosopher. Building that back room requires time, silence, attention. It requires reserving minutes of the day for no one. It requires writing without an expected reader. It requires reading without needing to post the quote afterward. It requires having a conversation with yourself without judging every thought that comes up. It's slow work, without applause, and nobody is going to pay you to do it. But without this work, you spend your entire life being someone else's content. With it, you finally become the author of your own existence. Pierre Hadot, in his book Spiritual Exercises and Ancient Philosophy, first published in French in 1981 and later translated into several languages, argued that ancient philosophy, especially Stoicism and Epicureanism, was essentially a daily practice, not an abstract theory. The ancients weren't casual readers of philosophy. They were practitioners. They had routines. They examined their consciences every night, as Seneca recommended in the book, On the Tranquility of the Soul. They read short passages and meditated on them throughout the day. They repeated maxims to themselves that worked as mental tools for specific situations. Montaigne inherited this practical tradition directly. For him, reading was practice. Writing was practice. Going up to the tower was practice. There was no philosophy separated from life. There was a life being philosophically lived, and the essays were the written record of this continuous practice. That's why his work ages so well. It's not a thesis to be refuted. It's a way of existing being rehearsed out loud, without final certainties, without any pretense to definitive truth. It's the exact opposite of contemporary self-help content, which promises results in 7 steps. There's an addiction in modern man that may be the hardest one to admit, precisely because it's the most intimate. The obsession with what other people think of him. No matter how old he is, how much money he's piled up, how much authority he carries on his business card. Deep down, he's still looking sideways to see if his outfit is right, if the sentence sounded good, if the photo got enough likes, if the opinion pleased whoever needed to be pleased. He lives second-hand. He exists through the reflection in other people's eyes. Montaigne unpacks this servitude in 2 powerful essays. In Of Glory, in the second book, number 16, he observes that chasing reputation is chasing smoke. Glory is echo. Echo of what? Of the opinion of people who barely know you, who have contradictory criteria among themselves, who will forget you the following week. In A Vanity, third book, number 9, he goes deeper. He says that living to impress is a sophisticated way of not living. It's outsourcing your own existence to an invisible tribunal made up of distracted strangers. Apply this to your day. How many decisions from last week were made thinking about how they would sound? Which car? Which trip? Which dinner photo? Which partner? Which well-behaved child? Which award-winning career? How much of your schedule is performance? How much of your exhaustion comes from maintaining this continuous performance? How much of your house was put together to be seen by people who will never really step inside it? There's a simple thought experiment that Montaigne, without using the term, described long before anyone else. Imagine living an entire year without needing to tell anyone anything, without posting, without commenting, without showing off, without leaving digital traces. Would you still travel, buy things, study, train, invest? If the honest answer is no, then a good chunk of what you call your life isn't life. It's a public resume staged for an audience that isn't even paying attention. Letting go of other people's opinions isn't saying that nobody matters. People matter a great deal, but the opinion that others have about you is none of your business. It's theirs. Taking care of your own conduct, yes. Taking care of the impression it makes, no. Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations that Montaigne read in the Latin translation by Xylander published in 1559, kept repeating to himself in Book 12, paragraph 17, that the one who gives too much importance to what others think loses himself in their heads. The American sociologist David Reisman, in the book The Lonely Crowd, published in 1950 by Yale University Press, described 3 types of social character. The tradition-directed, typical of pre-modern societies. The inner-directed, typical of the 19th century individual with an internal moral compass. And the other-directed, typical of the modern hyper-connected man, who constantly needs to check what others think in order to know what he himself should feel. Montaigne, writing at the end of the 16th century, is one of the first great literary representatives of the second type, the inner-directed man. In a culture increasingly other-directed, his voice sounds almost subversive. This is one of the most immediate liberations that reading Montaigne can offer you, and also one of the most resisted because it requires facing the emptiness that opens up when the applause stops and you still have to keep existing. Whoever has never crossed that emptiness has never known their own face. They live their entire life as a refraction of other faces that don't even know they exist as a reference. It's worth correcting a misunderstanding that surrounds the topic of letting go. There are people who confuse maturity with militant asceticism. They think that in order to release the superfluous, you have to become a monk, give everything away, eat rice with salt, sleep on a tatami floor, throw out the television. Montaigne would laugh at that. He was a nobleman. He enjoyed good wine from the Bordeaux region. He had an extremely expensive library of 1,000 leather-bound volumes. He dressed well. He ate well. He received distinguished guests in his castle, and he saw no contradiction between any of that and his philosophy. What Montaigne teaches isn't to abandon things, it's to not belong to them. There is a huge difference between using a phone and being used by the phone, between buying a car because it's useful and driving a car because it defines who you are socially, between having a house that shelters you and having a house that enslaves you in monthly payments that will eat up the next 20 years of your productive output. The criterion is internal. You feel that if the thing disappeared, you would disappear with it. If the answer is yes, it owns you. If the answer is no, you own it. Epicurus, in the letter to Meneuchus, written around the year 300 BC and preserved by Diogenes Laertius, said something precious. He is not poor who has little, but he who desires much. Seneca repeats this idea in various letters to Lucilius, especially in letter number 2, where he writes that poverty isn't in scant possessions, but in desire that never stops. Montaigne incorporates this lesson. The free man isn't the one who deprives himself. He's the one who knows the difference between real need and desire programmed by consumer culture, by advertising, by social comparison. Try an exercise this week. Look at your home with new eyes. Identify 5 objects you haven't used in the last 12 months, and that are still sitting there taking up space, attention, memory. Ask yourself why they're there. The answer carries information about who you are that no resume of yours would ever admit in writing. Every object kept out of guilt, out of an old promise, out of some supposed future value that's never going to arrive, is a tiny piece of your freedom rented out to the past or to a fantasy. In 1581, Montaigne was elected mayor of Bordeaux by acclamation. He served 2 terms until 1585, during a full outbreak of bubonic plague that killed a considerable portion of the urban population. He carried out the office with widely recognized competence. He negotiated truces between religious factions. He kept the city functioning. But he wrote, in the essay of Giving the Lie in the 3rd book, number 10, one of the most radical sentences in his entire work. The mayor and Montaigne have always been 2 people, and quite separate. Stop on that sentence. He's saying that the public role he was performing, with everything it required in terms of protocol, posture, decision-making, never defined him on the inside. The office was clothing, well-tailored, worn with dignity, put on with seriousness, executed with competence, but still clothing. And when he took off the uniform of the role at the end of the workday, he was still there. The man underneath the mayor remained intact, irreducible, inalienable. Modern man does exactly the opposite. He wears the job title all the way down to his soul. He introduces himself at a party saying, I am a lawyer, I am an engineer, I am a director, I am an entrepreneur, I am an influencer. He doesn't say I work as, he says I am. He confused profession with essence. And then, when the job falls away, unemployment, retirement, bankruptcy, layoff, restructuring, he goes into psychological collapse. He didn't lose a job. He lost an identity. Because he had deposited his identity in the wrong place, in the most fragile place possible, in the place that always depends on external circumstances to sustain itself. The same trap applies to family roles. I am a father. I am a husband. I am a devoted son. I am a present brother. These are roles you carry out, and carrying them out well matters a great deal. But they don't exhaust who you are. Underneath the father, the husband, the son, there's someone. Someone who existed before these roles and will exist after them, when the roles change, when the people you relate to grow up, leave, die, or simply go on living their own lives. That someone needs space to breathe, to think, to make mistakes, to dream, without having to fit into any functional description. Letting go of the social self isn't abandoning the roles. It's stopping confusing yourself with them. It's discovering, underneath all the masks, a face, and keeping that face yours, non-transferable, non-negotiable. When that face stays steady, all the masks become lighter, because you know you can take them off at any moment without ceasing to exist. In the 2nd book of the essay, number 31, Montaigne wrote the essay of anger. He observes, with the honesty that always characterized him, his own outbursts of rage throughout his life. He tells how, when he was young, he would hit his servants over small things and afterward regret it. How he learned, with time and with practice, to notice the anger rising before acting on it. How anger, acting without mediation, always led him to make worse decisions than the ones he would have made in silence 5 minutes later. The theoretical influence here is clear. Seneca wrote 3 entire books called De Ira, or On Anger, perhaps the most complete treatise from the ancient world on the subject. For the Stoics, passion isn't a raw feeling. It's a wrong judgment that has materialized as emotion. You get irritated because you think something should be different from what it is. You think traffic should flow. You think the client should pay on time. You think the kid should obey without arguing. You think your partner should guess your needs. Anger is the distance between the silent judgment and the brute fact. Montaigne proposes the exercise of observation. Don't deny the emotion when it comes. Don't repress it as if it were shameful. Don't judge it morally. Just notice it. You are feeling anger right now. You are feeling envy. You are feeling jealousy. You are feeling fear of something specific. Naming the emotion is the first step toward no longer being it. Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, repeated this practice to himself morning after morning. The Roman emperor reminded himself, in Book 2, paragraph 1, that he would meet people who were ungrateful, ill-tempered, arrogant, disloyal, and that if he kept his judgment clear, he wouldn't be disturbed by the actions of those others. You are not the anger you feel. You are the observer who watches it pass through. And that observation, when done well, dissolves half the power of the emotion. Not all of it. The emotions are still real, but enough so that you can act from another place, more centered, less reactive. Letting go of the passions that enslave you isn't becoming a block of emotional ice. It's no longer being dragged around by them. It's continuing to feel intensely, but feeling as the owner of your own feelings, not as the victim of inner storms that seem to come from outside. A man stops in front of a closed shop window at 11 at night. He sees his own reflection in the dark glass and takes a few seconds to recognize himself there. It's not the age that surprises him. It's the look of exhaustion he doesn't remember putting on at any point during the day. He walks 3 more blocks to his car without being able to name what he felt in that instant in front of the glass. Perhaps no essay of Montaigne's is as liberating for adult life as of Repentance, 3rd book, number 2. In it, Montaigne states something that still sounds almost scandalous by modern standards. He says he regrets almost nothing, and he explains why this isn't a lack of moral conscience, but an excess of philosophical honesty. Every decision he made was made by that Montaigne, in that specific moment, with that mind, that heart, the data available to him at the time. That Montaigne of the past no longer exists. The one who exists today is someone else, with another body, other information, other maturity, another context. Holding today's Montaigne accountable for a decision made by the 25-year-old would be absurd. They are, in some fundamental sense, different people inhabiting the same biography. Think about what this releases. Most of the emotional weight adults carry doesn't come from the present. It comes from a past that wasn't properly digested, from that career decision that maybe should have been a different one, from that relationship that dragged on for too long, from that child raised in a way that today seems mistaken, from that word spoken in anger during a fight that changed everything, from that money badly invested in the bubble of the moment, from that friend lost to a boy's pride. All of that already happened, and it could only have happened that way because you were who you were in that instant. Mentally rewriting the past is a useful lie for the suffering to drag on indefinitely. You wouldn't have done it differently. You would have done the same thing with the mind you had. If today you do it differently, it's precisely because you lived what you lived and learned what you learned. The new wisdom depends on that old mistake. Accepting the past isn't saying that everything that happened was good. There are serious mistakes. There are real wounds that still hurt. But accepting means stopping the fight against what is already a done deal. Energy spent fighting against the past is energy stolen from the present, where you can still do something. And the present, Montaigne discovered, is the only place where you can still do something real. If the past is a prison, the future is an illusion. In the final essay of the Essay of Experience, third book, number 13, Montaigne closes the work with a reflection that echoes directly in the hands of modern readers. He observes that we lose the present because we live projected into what doesn't yet exist. The person finishes dinner without remembering the taste of the food because their head was already on the email they're going to open after putting the kid to bed. They have a conversation with their child in the kitchen while internally rehearsing the sentence they're going to say to the boss on Monday. And out of the 15 minutes with the child, what's left at the end of the day is only the guilt of not having really been there. And he writes the sentence that became famous in philosophical circles: "When I dance, I dance. When I sleep, I sleep. When I walk in my orchard, it's the walk that occupies my thoughts." It's a manifesto of mindful attention 300 years before the term existed in modern psychological vocabulary. The Buddhists had already been teaching this for more than 2,000 years in the East, in texts like the Satipatthana Sutta. Montaigne, without any direct contact with Buddhism, arrives at the same place by his own path, starting from the Stoics and the Skeptics. Contemporary anxiety is, to a considerable extent, an addiction to the future. The person can't have dinner without thinking about tomorrow's email that hasn't even arrived yet, can't sleep without going over Monday's schedule, can't play with the child without checking the notification in his pocket. The practical consequence is that they're never where they are. They live in a permanent hypothesis, in a draft of tomorrow that never materializes the way they imagined. Letting go of the future doesn't mean no longer planning. Montaigne planned. He had an inheritance to manage, vineyards to look after, trips to take through Italy, books to write. But planning isn't living inside the plan. Planning is deciding now what will be done later, writing it down, and going back to now. Whoever confuses planning with presence loses both. Loses the present, because they're in the plan, and also loses the future, because they arrive at it with the same anxious mind that ruined the present. Life happens in the now. It always has. It always will. Whoever lets go of projection finally comes into contact with the only real time that exists in human experience. Early in the second book of the Essays, number 1, there's an essay called "Of the Inconstancy of Our Actions." In it, Montaigne makes an observation that shakes any pretense of fixed identity. He says essentially that we are plural, that the same man is generous in the morning and stingy in the afternoon of that same day, that he is brave in one situation and a coward in another, that he deeply loves the same person he ends up hating an hour later over a silly argument, that there is no coherent and stable self. There is a school of selves coexisting inside the same skin. For modern man, addicted to personal branding and to a coherent facade, this observation is disconcerting, but it's profoundly liberating once it's been digested properly. Because letting go of a fixed self is the only way to stop exhausting yourself trying to keep up an appearance. There's a sentence in the Essay of Repentance, third book, number 2, that says roughly this: "I do not paint the being, I paint the passage." Montaigne understood that there was no solid self to portray. There was a flow, a constant transformation. And the honest work was to describe that flow, not to freeze it into a marble statue. Apply this to your life. How many times have you forced yourself to remain faithful to an old version of yourself, even though you had already changed on the inside, just so you wouldn't disappoint the people who knew you that way? How many opinions do you sustain today only because you sustained them yesterday? How many relationships do you keep going purely out of inertia? How many habits do you repeat just because they once defined you? How many clothes do you wear because you feel obligated to keep looking like that specific person? Letting go of yourself, of the rigid identity, is the most intimate act of courage in adult life. It's saying I have changed and no longer apologizing for it. It's giving up pretending consistency where there has already been evolution. It's accepting internal contradiction as part of being human and not as a flaw to be corrected. Whoever allows themselves to change can breathe. Whoever forces themselves to always be the same gradually suffocates. And that suffocation is one of the silent sources of modern depression. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you about the accident that almost killed Montaigne and that changed his relationship with the fear of dying forever. That episode is the turning point of the entire philosophy we're going through right now. We've reached the philosophical heart of Montaigne's entire work. The essay is called "That to Philosophize is to Learn to Die," first book, number 20. The title isn't Montaigne's invention. He borrowed it from Cicero, who in turn borrowed it from Plato, from the dialogue Phaedo, where Socrates, on the verge of drinking the hemlock in the prison of Athens in 399 BC, tells his gathered disciples that all of philosophy is preparation for death. Montaigne doesn't hide it from the reader. Death is the only absolute certainty of human life. Everything else is probability, hypothesis, a bet. Only death is a guaranteed fact, and the man who lives avoiding thinking about it is mortified twice. Once every day, by the diffuse fear that hums underneath everything, and again when it arrives and catches him unprepared, as if it were some unimaginable surprise. The proposal is radical in its simplicity. Think about death with calm, with serene regularity, without drama and without morbidity. Remember, every day, that you're closer to it than you were yesterday. Not to make yourself sad, to wake up to life. The Stoics called this practice memento mori, remember that you will die. Seneca, in various letters to Lucilius, especially in letter number 26 and in letter number 70, writes about how he learned to die a little every day, in small practices, so that he could arrive at his last day without astonishment and without revolt. When you let go of the fear of death, paradoxically, you discover life, because the fear of death is what lies behind almost every other human fear. Fear of losing a job, fear of being alone, fear of serious illness, fear of growing old, fear of the unknown, fear of radical change. All of them are, deep down psychologically, derivatives of the same older fear. When the fear of the end loosens its grip, the other fears lose the weight they had borrowed from it. It's not about wanting to die. It's not about romantic morbidity. It's about not living cornered by something that's going to happen no matter what, regardless of your will or your effort. Whoever accepts death stops bargaining with it. And whoever stops bargaining with death finally starts making real choices in life, instead of choices driven by avoiding the end. That is perhaps the highest form of letting go that Montaigne teaches. The letting go of your own ending, and it only comes with practice. The American psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her book On Death and Dying, published by Macmillan in 1969, devoted years to interviewing terminal patients and described 5 psychological stages that almost all of them went through in the face of death: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The point wasn't to prescribe a rigid path. It was to show that acceptance only comes at the end, after a great deal of inner work, and that many people die still in anger or in bargaining, without ever having truly crossed through the fear. Montaigne proposes anticipating this work, doing now, while you're healthy, the psychological work that most people only do, in a hurry, in their final days. Whoever arrives at the deathbed having already accepted, dies in peace. Whoever arrives denying, dies at war. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger, in the book Being and Time, published in 1927, argued that the human being only lives authentically when he assumes himself as being toward death. As long as he avoids the thought of finitude, he lives in a mode of flight, distracted by the small urgencies of daily life. When he accepts finitude as a defining horizon, every choice gains real weight. Time becomes limited, and therefore valuable. Heidegger, without quoting Montaigne directly, is in dialogue with the same intuition. There is no intense life without a clear awareness of death. There is only distracted existence, eternally postponed. There's an episode narrated in the Essay of Practice, second book, number 6, that makes all of this concrete in the flesh. Montaigne tells how, one day, he was riding through the countryside near the castle when one of his servants, mounted on a big, fast horse, mistimed a maneuver and slammed into him from behind with violence. Montaigne was thrown several meters, fell to the ground unconscious, drenched in blood, with his clothes torn and his face swollen. His companions carried him home, thinking he was dying right there on the road. He vomited blood during the trip. He didn't speak. He moved without any apparent awareness. And here is the decisive philosophical point. When he later woke up at home and could mentally reconstruct what he had been through, he discovered something surprising. That state of imminent death hadn't been frightening. It had been gentle, almost pleasant. The body was letting go. Consciousness was gradually dissolving. There was no metaphysical pain. There was only a quiet dissolution. The discovery marked him forever. If dying was like that, then all the anticipated terror of death was the terror of an image fabricated by the mind, not of the thing itself. The imagination was worse than the concrete reality. Years later, Montaigne began to suffer from severe kidney stones, an inheritance from his father, who had also suffered from them. The attacks were excruciating. He learned to observe them too, to not rebel against them, to not pray for them to end, to simply go through them with the same attention with which he had gone through other events of the body. He wrote, in the Essay of Practice, second book, number 6, and returned to the theme in the final Essay of Experience, third book, number 13, that physical pain is unbearable only when you add to it the fantasy that it shouldn't be there. Apply this to your life. You get sick. You get a scare during a routine exam. The body fails in some test that had always been good. The typical modern reaction is indignation. Why me? Why right now, in the middle of the project? That indignation doubles the real suffering. The physical pain was already enough, but you added the metaphysical pain, the feeling that the universe is personally betraying you. Montaigne proposes another path, accepting that the body is fragile by nature, that it will fail at some point, that it sleeps less than it deserves, that it ages without asking for permission, and that this acceptance is not passive resignation, it is active lucidity, and lucidity hurts less than revolt. In the third book, essay number 3, titled Of Three Kinds of Company, Montaigne reflects on the 3 relationships that nourished him most in practical life: conversation with exceptional men, the company of beautiful and intelligent women, and the reading of good books. Notice the subtle point. He doesn't say that he needs these relationships to exist. He says he nourishes himself with them. A subtle difference, but a decisive one for understanding the whole philosophy. Whoever needs someone in order to exist suffocates the relationship. They overwhelm people. They drain people. They demand presence all the time, validation, proof of love. Whoever lets go of the desperate need for company, ironically, ends up with better company, because they offer presence without dependence. Being with you is a pleasure, not a billable obligation. Nobody wants to stay with someone who needs them desperately. Everyone wants to stay with someone who freely chooses them. The same principle applies to friendship. Montaigne had once had la Boétie. He knew that friendship was unrepeatable, unique, irrecoverable in any other relationship, but he didn't spend the rest of his life trying to replace it. He kept other ties, lighter ones, more functional, without demanding from them what only la Boétie had been able to offer. Whoever understands that each relationship has its own measure lives more lightly. They don't expect from a coworker what you can only ask of a sibling. They don't expect from a child what you can only ask of an adult friend. They don't expect from love what you can only ask of yourself in the inner arrière-boutique. Solitude well inhabited is the solid foundation of any healthy bond. Whoever is fine being alone can choose who to be with. Whoever can't stand their own company accepts any available company to escape themselves. And accepting any company is the surest formula for lasting unhappiness, because you always end up with the wrong people for the wrong reason, which is escape. The central paradox of letting go is this: the less you need the other in order to exist, the more you can love the other as they are. and not as you wish they were in order to fill your holes. That is adult love. Without that underground demand that makes every gesture of affection feel like the payment of an old debt. Just a mutual choice renewed every day, with the clear awareness that it could end and that this possibility takes nothing away from the present value. The German psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, in the book The Art of Loving, published in 1956 by Harper, distinguished mature love from immature love precisely on this point. For Fromm, immature love says, "I love you because I need you." Mature love inverts this. It says, "I need you because I love you." In the first formula, the other is an instrument to fill an internal lack. In the second, the other is an end in themselves, and the need is a consequence, not a cause. Montaigne, without using these categories, lived and described in the essay a form of love that comes very close to the second formula. He had friends not because he depended on them. He had friends because he was already complete enough to freely choose with whom to share his own company. The American philosopher Martha Nussbaum, in the book Upheavals of Thought, published by Cambridge University Press in 2001, argues that emotions aren't irrational forces that attack the subject from the outside. They are cognitive judgments about what matters to us. Whoever reorganizes what matters reorganizes their own emotions. Whoever lets go of the wrong things suffers less. Whoever attaches themselves to the right things loves more deeply. Montaigne, 400 years earlier, was already doing this meticulous work of inner reordering in his essays. That's why he reads so well today. He isn't dated. He's outside of time, precisely because he deals with what doesn't change in the human being. You've made it this far. You've walked through the life of a French nobleman dead for more than 400 years. His tower, his friendship, his fall from the horse, his essays. But none of that is worth anything at all if it stays as decorative knowledge on the mental shelf. Montaigne himself despised wisdom made of empty quotations. He wanted wisdom practiced in real life, in the flesh, in the small gestures of the day. 3 gestures for this week. The first, identify one thing, opinion, or expectation you're ready to release. Just one, not 20. 1. Release it for real. Donate the object that's been sitting unused for 2 years. Stop publicly defending the opinion you already suspect doesn't hold up. Mentally hand back the expectation to whoever placed it on you in your childhood. Write down the old grudge on paper, read it out loud to the air of the room, and burn the paper. The second, reserve 20 minutes a day for your personal arrière-boutique. You don't need hours. 20 minutes is enough. No phone, no news, no music with words demanding attention. It can be pure silence. It can be slow reading of something good. It can be writing by hand in a notebook. It can be walking with no destination. The only criterion is that nothing from the outside world enters there without conscious permission. That space, built every single day without fail, becomes an inner foundation that nobody can take from you later. The third, read at least one essay from Montaigne's essay this week. There are excellent translations available. I recommend the complete edition published in 3 volumes by Penguin Classics, in English, translated by M.A. Screech, considered the world reference by scholars. Start with Of Solitude, or With That to Philosophize is to Learn to Die, or with Of Repentance. Read slowly. There's no test. There's no deadline. Read like someone having a conversation with a friend who lived before you and left messages in writing for whoever might come after. Letting go isn't losing. Letting go is finally owning yourself, without intermediaries, without an external inventory to maintain. The man who collects everything in the end has nothing, because he's rented out by the very things he carries. The man who releases with empty hands discovers that those empty hands are precisely what's free to hold what truly matters in the present moment. Michel de Montaigne died on September 13th, 1592, at the age of 59, in the same Périgord castle, in the same region where he had been born, with the same serene sobriety with which he had lived the last 2 decades. He left 3 books of essays that continue to answer questions he didn't even know would exist, because those questions are yours, now, in another language, another time, another body. The wisest thing he ever did wasn't writing the essays. It was letting go before writing. Letting go of the office, the social expectation, the ideological certainty, the public glory, and finally finding the man who existed underneath all of that accumulation. That man is waiting for you to make the same gesture, on your own scale, in your own life, in your own time. If this video touched you somewhere that hurt, leave a like, subscribe to the channel to continue this philosophical journey with me, and if you want to go deeper into these themes, join our members club, where I dive into each of these concepts in exclusive content. The next decision is yours. Let go of something today. Start small, but start.